We've been looking at the different parts of Christian evidences, and another way that you'll probably hear it is apologetics, different ways of showing the evidence for the existence of God. And there are a lot of, there's several different, a lot of different paths, rather, that we can go down to try, to defend his deity, to defend that fact that there is a God. And of course, the atheists do not want to accept this. They have campaigned against it. They have put out millions and millions of dollars to try to upend any teaching about God. They've gotten into our universities and our schools, and they, all sorts of places, into entertainment. And we, Katie and I were watching a TV show not too long ago, or we started watching it. And the very first episode was talking about how all the atheists were right, and how the Christians were wrong, and how absurd the Christian, it was a science fiction TV show, and it was put out, and I should have known, because it was put out by a director-producer that is a well-known atheist, and he's pretty staunch with his teachings about it. But we thought we'd watch it anyway, just to see what it was, and turned it off about halfway through because we thought it was ridiculous. So. But it shows you just the influence that they have in all these different areas and with it. So, what happened? I want to ask first off, and I don't think I asked this. I mean, I asked if if you've ever gotten into a conversation with one, and a number of people raised their hands. How many know an atheist right now? That's actually in your life, not just someone that you know, someone who knows someone who knows someone, just happen to know who they are, but someone that's actually in kind of your people.
My friend is called an existentialist.
Okay, an existentialist, and it's he gets it right.
Lovely person.
Okay, and a lot of them are. I mean, their personalities are great. I know atheists that have debated that, and people like them, and because of their personality, they're funny, and they attract a lot of people to them. So we're not saying anything about the personalities or if they're likable or not, but when it comes down to it, we want to know whether or not there is something to this God that we read about in a Bible that we follow. And so what we've been looking at are the philosophical, and there's two areas that we're along this series that we're primarily going to look at, and that's the philosophical and the scientific with it. The philosophical is what we started with last week or week before, 2 weeks ago, I guess. And we're going to continue with it tonight. And after we exhaust all the philosophical arguments that I want to go over, then we'll get into the scientific. And it's because these are the two main areas that atheism really hits. One of the reasons why atheism is so popular on college campuses is because they know college students, and they've accepted that they're not scientists themselves or trying to promote atheism. They know a lot of the college students are not scientists. Everyone in this auditorium, at least to my knowledge, we're not trained or have degrees in the science realm. Now, we've studied about it. We probably know some things about it, and some probably more than others, but we are not what people would classify as scientists because we don't have all those degrees with it. Okay, but so where they are hitting them is with the philosophical arguments, and they're just trying to reason with them from a mental or psychological area to try to reason them into atheism. And that's where, if you know of anyone, or if you ever come in contact with one, it is good to know the kind of discussion to have, the right questions to ask, the right areas to take them, because they can really, they're good at it. They know how to twist your words and turn conversations upside down to cause a lot of confusion. And they've done that. They've gotten, people that proclaim God and are who claim that they're very sound in their own faith, just, scratching their heads because they start giving all this information out, and the person, by the end of it starts to question why. It's no wonder why kids come home sometimes from school and they start to talk to their parents and start having doubts about religion, because parents just assume, well, you're just, we just go to church every week, or we attend worship services rather. We don't go to church. we are the church, but we attend worship services and think that's enough for a child. Well, you get 1 hour a week, and this is one of the reasons why I really wanted to pound this home this past Sunday morning, because when we start to, we don't prioritize the way that we need to, you think of what worship service has for your child. It's got what, 1 hour, 2 hours on Sunday? You come on Wednesday, you get another what, half hour, 45 minutes with it, and where are they at the rest of the week if they go to a public school? They have hours on end with these secular thinkers. Not every class is a science class, but when they do go in there, they just keep learning this over and over and over, and they just keep drilling these students. And then they come home, and they're asking all the questions, and parents don't know what to do. They don't know how to answer all the questions that schools are now giving to them. And then you have all these atheistic evangelists that start coming to the schools, and they start trying to, give all this literature and all this different information to students. And it's no wonder why it turns them upside down. They don't know how to answer it. And if they don't know how to answer it, they figure, well, there must be something to it, because I can't defend it or defend Christianity the way my mom and dad wants me to defend it. So this is, what we're looking at are some arguments that are really effective and that have turned the heads and turned the minds of a lot of different atheistic thinkers with it. We started out last week looking at this one. I want to continue with this, and then we'll move on to the next one. Ontological arguments. That is, how many have heard, I can't remember, how many, with a show of hands, have heard that term? Ontology or ontological. Okay, basically it's just the state of being. That's all the ontological is. We are here. Why am I here? What's so important about me being here? We know that we exist, right? We've heard that, and it was a famous poet who said, I think, therefore I am. Well, that's it. I know that I'm conscious of who I am, therefore I know that I exist. And I've heard of, there's some that try to really throw a wrench into this whole discussion here, because, I've heard things like, everything that's around us, we exist as far as we just perceive ourselves. Have you ever heard that? Or everything that everything around us that we're conscious of is only because we perceive it that way, and different people perceive things a different way. And someone who might have mental issues or might be in a mental hospital to us, and we think they're just crazy. Well, they have something going on inside their head, but that's how they perceive reality. And so everything around us is just, reality is just how we perceive it. And, your reality, which is interesting because, your reality, we're sitting here talking to each other, communicating with each other, and I can understand you and you can understand me, and we can, so is reality really just how we perceive it, or is there something more to it? Okay, that's where a lot of them try to come from. And so the state of being or existing, there's some different arguments that we can present that really will help in engaging someone that, if they are of the atheistic mindset. Okay, first one is the Modal Ontological Argument. Okay, this is a simple state of being argument. Okay, as we go through this, and it's sort of a progression with this argument that goes on. Okay, first one, the first premise is that it is possible that a maximally great being exists. If you were here last week, this is kind of, at least this slide is, you've seen it. If you're not here last week, then this is new for you. It is possible that a maximally great being exists. Okay, by maximally great being, we mean a being who possesses all great-making properties to the highest degree in every possible world. In other words, this is a being that creates the greatest world, creates the greatest things in that greatest world in every possible world that there is, that would exist. I mean, we know this world, this is all we've been a part of. But if there's another world beyond this world, then he would be the greatest maker of that world as well. Does that make sense? That's what a maximally great being would be. These properties would include, but not necessarily be limited to, okay, I think it's up there. Omnipotence, omniscience, in other words, him being all-powerful, all-knowing, moral, he is moral perfection. There is absolutely nothing faulty about this maximally great being. Okay, note also that this being would have to possess these traits in every possible world. In other words, he'd have to be the greatest maker, the greatest thinker, the most powerful, the most morally perfect being in every possible world that he's a part of or that he is in. And a being who is morally perfect in 10 possible worlds and morally compromised in the rest of them is vastly inferior to the one who is morally perfect in every possible world. Does that make sense? In other words, if there is one world in which he is not all of this, then he's not that he's not that maximally great being. There's someone even greater than he is because he's not the greatest being. Because there's one world that he is inferior. So this maximally great being has to be this maximally great being in every possible world. The same as all. Well, this world, next world, doesn't matter. He's got to be every world that that could possibly exist. Whether you believe in different, whether you believe in worlds beyond this one or worlds outside of this universe, whatever it is, he has to be the greatest being that's made everything. Otherwise, he's not a maximally great being. Okay? The same is also true of the other two properties. To object to the possible existence of a maximally great being, one would have to find something logically contradictory to that. In other words, saying, I have evidence or proof that he is not the maximally great being. I have proof that could stand opposed to why he couldn't be that all-powerful being. Or else incoherent in the possible existence of such a being, okay? So we've got this maximally great being, okay? If a maximally great being exists in every possible world, if it's possible that a maximally great being exists, then this being exists in some possible world. He has to exist in some world. And if a maximally great being exists in some possible world, then this being exists in every possible world in order for him to be this maximally great being. And if a maximally great being exists in every possible world, and they're calling him this, and this is a part of this argument. I know it sounds kind of redundant with keep saying, well, this maximally great being, but that is exactly who he has to be. Does that make sense? He has to be this all-powerful. I mean, it really starts to put into perspective how great God is, and we do a disservice whenever we humanize him, whenever we bring him down to our level, whenever we do not make him and exalt him as the greatest being ever, the most all-knowing, all-powerful, just all-creating being. And if a maximally great being exists in every possible world, then this being exists in the actual world. If it's every possible world, then this world has to be one of those worlds. And if a maximally great being exists in the actual world, then a maximally great being has to exist. And therefore, a maximally great being exists. We can't comprehend that. Because there's no way that we'll ever hit the status of a maximally great being. But that's that's the modal ontological argument as to why we have this state of being, is because there is we have to there's another route you kind of go. I don't have it up on this. That is it possible for man to be everywhere at once? Is it possible for you or me to be in every part of the world at once? No. Or at the same time? No. Well, okay, then if we can't be in every possible world, is it possible that there is some part of the world that is unoccupied by us? Well, yes, of course. Okay, then is it possible that that's where God is? Does that make sense? We have to welcome the fact that, okay, that could be God. Are we at, what's another one? Are we in, do we take up all time all at once? I know that sounds kind of silly, but God is, we work on a timeline, don't we? We don't work in eternity. So is it possible that time that we're not a part of, is it possible that God is there? Is it possible, all the places that we can't be, everything that we can't create, everything that we can't comprehend, is it possible that could be God? Well, we have to, yes, it's possible that could be God. And that's when we start this ontological argument, this modal ontological argument, which is kind of where it starts, that, this maximally great being who creates everything, if it's possible that he could be in every part of the world, then that means it has to be this world, and therefore God. Now, as I go through these, some of them are probably going to make more sense than others. If there is one argument that makes more sense to you, and I've talked to friends of mine that are into apologetics. They've worked in apologetics for several years, and they are used to all of these different arguments being thrown around, and they come up by and they're great arguments, all of them. But there's some that they're more partial to, that make more sense to them. And I was talking to him the other day, and I said, well, that's your favorite argument, but if another argument is enough to pull someone out of atheism, doesn't that have value? And it's true with as we were talking, that some of these might make more sense to you. Some might make more sense to someone you're talking to. And if that's the case, use it. Because all of these are reasoning the same thing, that there is God. And he's all powerful. That's where we're trying to get to, is to pull someone from rejecting God to accepting that there has to be a supreme being, that this is God, that he's all, this all powerful. There's another argument that has to do with this ontological, and that is the Anselm argument. Anselm has been around for quite a while, this argument, and the person who did it, Anselm, he was a Catholic priest. But he said, he came up with this concept that there's a being better than which one cannot conceive. In other words, the fact that we can conceive an all-powerful God proves that he exists, because we can think it. We can't conceive anything better than God, can we? It is impossible for us, because the most powerful thing that we can muster up, and we can't even conceive what that is. And the fact that we can't think of anything greater proves that there is a God, or that there is God, because we can't fathom it. Okay? And we can know things around us. We can fathom the world around us. We know that there are some pretty powerful people in this world. But the fact that, I can say, look at creation and say, I can't conceive of anyone greater than God that would make something like this. Now you can try to take the scientific route and say, well, it just happened. But then you start getting into, okay, well, but how? And then they say, well, the Big Bang, and then there's this little prick, and then there's this, it blew up and made all these planets and these rocks and all this stuff, and okay, but still there's the universe. And this universe was here some way. You ask an atheist to fathom eternity, he can't do it any better than we can. They cannot conceive eternity. Yet they'll try to tell you, well, the universe was here eternally, that it was never created, it was just always has been. Well, how? Something had to be, it had to come from somewhere. It wasn't just, they can't, but they're trying to reject God for whatever reason. But the Anselm's argument is that there cannot be anything greater, that there's a being greater than anyone which cannot conceive. That's Anselm's argument. Again, Might make sense to you, might not. But I just want to put these arguments out here for that. These are the philosophical arguments for the existence of God. There are some that really start to make sense that I absolutely love, that are probably my go-to arguments when I talk to someone about it, and we're going to look at them in the next little bit here. Number one, these moral arguments that we see. We have a conscience, don't we? This is one of the, to me, this is probably one of the greatest. If I had, my brother claims to be atheist right now. If I had a conversation with my brother today, this is probably one of my go-to arguments that I would press him on. Is, some of these moral arguments, and then there's one beyond this that hopefully we'll get to tonight. If not, we'll get to it next week. Okay, we have a conscience. Having a conscience means that we have a state of being, don't we? I'm conscious of who I am. I'm conscious of where I am. I'm conscious of what I'm doing. I'm conscious of the time throughout the day that we're doing different things, right? Okay, so, but we're conscious of all these things, but I also have a conscience of knowing what I should be doing, what I shouldn't be doing, right things that I'm doing, wrong things that I'm doing. Animals don't have consciences. They don't reason, oh, this is right. This is the right thing to do. I'm just going to, we have a rabbit. My son, it's like the only thing, the only person that she'll listen to because he's a stubborn little animal, but he'll, there are different orders that he'll bark out and she'll jump into her cage. She'll be out running around or just sitting there because that's what she does. And I'll say, go, get in your cage. Her name's Lucy. Get in your cage, Lucy. She'll just sit there. Get in your cage, Lucy. And then, Micah comes along and does something, and I can chase her into her cage. I'm pretty good at that. Then she thumps at me. But I can't but they don't have a conscience. They're not looking at, oh, hey, this is the right thing to do. They're not looking at, hey, if I get into this, if a dog gets into garbage or does whatever, they don't have a conscience of doing anything, do they? There's no concept of right or wrong. Now, they know they did something wrong if you get after them, if you discipline them, you spank them. But they don't have a conscience of right and wrong. An atheist has a conscience. And until an atheist gets rid of his conscience completely, he can't be a true atheist. Meaning he has to accept God exists. Now, we can have our conscience seared, but we can't get rid of it. I want to look at a couple of things right here as we look at this. Question. We see this right here. Did Hitler do the right thing in eliminating the Jews? Yes or no? How many think he did the right thing by eliminating the Jews? How many think he did not do the right thing and it was a horrible, horrible thing to do to the Jews? I think all of us would, do you realize an atheist will say the same thing? Why? Why would an atheist think Hitler did not, that it wasn't right what Hitler did? Why do we say, why was it wrong for Hitler to do what he did? I'm asking you, what? Okay, he was killing, shouldn't have killed. Anyone else? We what? We have a conscience. We know that's not good, right? I mean, he destroyed the lives sadistically of millions of Jews simply because they were Jews. He wanted a master race. He wanted everyone to be the same. And if you weren't like him, you're gone. Why else? Why was it not the right thing to do? We know it wasn't the right, right? An atheist will say the same thing. But why? See, an atheist think we're just these particles. They think there's nothing more than just this flesh and blood. Remember last week when I showed the value of just our physical bodies and how there's nothing more, how we can actually place a value on just all the physical components of our body. Our heart has a value. Our lungs have a value. Our bones have a value. Our organs have a value. Our muscles have a value. Our elements in our body have a value. Our hair, our brain, our eyes, our ears, and, just anything. You can, people, who need a kidney transplant, they say, I want a kidney, it's going to cost them, but they get one, don't they? Because there's a value that they can place. Until you start looking further. You see, if that's all we are, a bunch of particles, then what does it matter that something's right or wrong? It wouldn't, would it? Because we're just particles, just doing what particles do, just doing what the flesh does. Here's another one that's a hot topic in the news right now. Okay? We know what all that is, right? Heard it. It's on the news every week. Black Lives Matter. Why do Black Lives matter? This is one of the, it's probably one of the hottest areas that we, all the time, don't we? We've been seeing this for the last probably 2 years and even beyond that. People are saying Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter, and I agree, Black lives do matter. I know, people are saying, yes, Black Lives Matter, White Lives Matter, Asian Lives Matter, Hispanic Lives Matter, and yes, we do go through all of that, but I want to hone in on this, because that is where everyone has been really making a big deal about this, including atheists. In fact, there are a lot of atheists who've been marching for this very thing, that why do Black Lives matter? Okay. But what, you think about that. If we're just a bunch of flesh, just a bunch of particles that have no value at all, that nothing's going to happen after this life, nowhere is it, then why do Black Lives matter? Why was it not right for Hitler to do what he did? And we can go on and say, why this? Well, why this? Well, why this? And, all these different moral things that people, that people care about. Why does it matter? Why does any of it matter? Because if we're just a bunch of particles, none of it should matter. It shouldn't matter, it shouldn't matter what happens to anyone if we're just a bunch of particles. But it does matter, doesn't it? And it matters to a lot of people. And it matters to them because to them, this is the morally right thing to be conscious of. This is, when they march or when they, and I'm not talking about setting police cars on fire and looting and doing all that stupid stuff. But there are some that are wanting equality. We know that back in the 60s, there were drinking fountains for white people and black people. People of dark skin had to sit in the back of a bus. How demeaning was that? And yet there were people that fought against it, didn't they? There were atheists that stood against that. But why would that have been such a big deal if all we are is a bunch of particles? You have to value human life in order to do that. But once you start to value your human life, now all of a sudden you're starting to talk about ethics. Now all of a sudden you're starting talking about morals. Where does that come from in the atheistic realm, though? Because an atheist shouldn't care about that, but they do. And so these atheists who will march for all these different things, who will stand up for different things, who will oppose different things that are unethical or immoral. Why does an atheist, you ask an atheist, a lot of atheists are married, aren't they? Atheists are married to a wife and they are devoted to their wife and they will never cheat on their wife. They love their children. They will do everything for their children. They make sure that their family's provided for. And every time they see their wife, they will tell her that they love her. Well, who cares if we're just a bunch of flesh? They feel those emotions. What tells an atheist, hey, you know what? It's the right thing to do not to cheat on my wife. It's the right thing to do not to come home and just beat on her when I get angry or hit my child or talk down to him or her. But they don't do it because there's a moral There's a morality that's inside of them. That morality comes from somewhere. It doesn't come from just empty flesh and particles and so forth. And so when we look at this, we need to realize every person has a conscience. Now, here's what we need to realize when we do have that conscience. We can violate it, can't we? We can ignore it. We might not care about it. And it might be even mistaught. It's interesting when atheists start talking about morality, they say, well, all morality is because of Christianity. Christians came up with morality. It's a belief in God. But yet morality and ethics apply in areas where the Bible has never even, or very little of it has been taught. People still know that, this is the right thing to do. This is not the right thing to do. A conscience does have to be taught right, though, doesn't it? Is it possible for someone to believe they're doing the right thing and not be doing the right thing? Do you have an example of anyone? Okay, that's that's an interesting example of it, because it's, we have, when it comes to our children, we just, we probably think about things differently than what we might for someone else's child, or, and we make decisions for our own children, don't we? Look at Acts 23. Acts 23:1, if someone wants to read it when you get there.
Paul looked straight ahead at Sanhedrin and said, "My brothers, I have fulfilled my duty to God in all good conscience to this day."
Okay. Paul had a conscience. He said he had a conscience, right? But when he made this statement, when Paul looked earnestly at the council and he said, "Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day." What was he talking about right there? What's the context of this? He said, "I've lived in all good conscience until this day." What did Paul do before the road to Damascus? Persecuting. He thought what he did was right, wasn't it? That's exactly what he's saying right here. His conscience, to him, the right thing to do was to kill Christians or put them to death. Why? Why was that the right thing to do for Paul, or what he thought? He what? Okay. He saw them as the enemy, saw them as the enemy of the government, saw them as the enemy, you remember, Paul was Jewish. He thought, this enemy was, these Christians were going against everything. He thought he was doing right. He was convinced of it. But he was mistaught, wasn't he? He didn't do anything right. And then when he finally realized it, then he made this change. And that's why, when you look at the conscience does need to be set right. Paul was still thinking, I'm doing the right thing. This is the right thing to do because these people are going against, this Christian faith was going against everything that he believed in. And so, there's some things that are wrong. There are some things that are right. And when a child violates what he knows is right, his conscience is going to prick him, isn't it? When you finally realize what is right and wrong. Remember Pentecost? All these Jews who are calling for the blood of the Son of God, Peter comes along with the other apostles and they preach that sermon saying, you put him there. It is because of you that Christ was on the cross 50 days ago. When you saw him go up on that cross, when he was nailed up there, that's on you. You did that to him. And what happened? How did they respond? It pricked their hearts. That is a really profound emotion right there. Because it's not them just realizing, oh, we did, what did we goof up? That was something that they realized for the first time how serious it was to execute him, the Christ. That's who they were, and it said they pricked them in their hearts. But until that time, they didn't know any better. Jesus even said it when he was up on the cross. Father, forgive them. Why? They don't know what they're doing. They thought they did. And it hit them deeply when Peter said what he did. And so, the conscience needs to be set right. Misteaching it is going to harden the conscience. That's what happened to Paul. And, schools will misteach children. Schools aren't going to teach religion, are they? You're not going to walk into a public school and sit down and get a Bible lesson. It's just not going to happen. Not now. Used to, long time ago. Or at least they would be somewhat religious. In fact, school criteria as far as like rules and so forth with the school were actually Bible-based. And in fact, how many in here remember that? That was before even me, and when that was happening. But I know, because I've seen the old books and the rules and so forth with school. Warren, you raised your hand. You remember when schools actually had, when they taught religious things about the Bible and there might not have been whole classes devoted to it, but they brought in biblical concepts, didn't they? It's amazing. Is that right? Do we do that now? That hasn't happened for a long time. But I guarantee you the children back then were a lot more respectful. They knew, what it was. Not that kids cannot be respectful today, because good parenting will help that. Just don't let the schools raise your children for you. But schools can mistreat children, or can misteach children. It's hard to take out of someone's mind that there's a judgment, that there's a judgment coming, and that we are going to be judged for everything that we do. No one can do away with the conscience, though, of a human being. It's impossible. We can, an atheist can disregard it. Atheist can misteach it. He can harden it. He can violate it, but it's still there. It's not going to go away. They're just going to try to twist it into some different things. Not only that, but we have certain drives, don't we? There are certain drives in us. Well, what makes those drives? We have, these hunger drives. We're driven, we crave something, don't we? You ever had a craving and you just, and nothing, you can feed yourself whatever you want, but if you don't have that one thing, well, it's just not satisfying, is it? We get like that. I get like that in the afternoon sometimes. I get a sweet tooth about 3 o'clock. That's what I can tell. 3 o'clock in the afternoon hits. I know it's 3 o'clock because I crave ice cream or chocolate or something. But you crave that, and there's nothing that's going to satisfy it. You get thirst drives. I get thirsty, and I want something. But it can't just be any drink. It's got to be Mountain Dew, or it's got to be coffee, or it's got to be milk, or even water, whatever the case might be. There are certain basic drives that all humans. What do you think the strongest drive man has? Self-preservation is the strongest drive that man can have. In other words, if your life is in danger, if it's threatened, We're not, there's certain things that we're not going to be asking for. If my life is in danger, I'm not going to say, hey, you know what sounds really good? A cheeseburger. Because I'm not thinking about that, am I? Self-preservation is the strongest drive that man has, that we will do absolutely anything to preserve life. You look at 9/11. 9/11, human beings work to rescue other human beings, including atheists. Why did we do that? Why would we do that if there's no conscience? Because atheists don't think they have a conscience, or they can't describe this conscience. Why? Why does an atheist, during 9/11 think, you know what, I've got to get into that building, or I've got to drag this person to safety, or I've got to get them to a hospital? Remember 9/11, and you saw everyone just working for everyone else. But why would they do that with no conscience? Why would a soldier fall on a grenade and give his life to save another person? There have been atheistic soldiers in the military. There's a drive that a part of a man that says you go against the strongest drive that man has and risk your life to save another fellow human being. We have those drives. Why would we have that if we're just a bunch of flesh? It doesn't make sense at all. Next week, we're going to finish up this part of it. There's just a tiny little bit I want to cover from it, and then we're going to get into some more moral arguments. And there's another one that's really an interesting one that I think we'll get into next week that I want to show you. Anyway, appreciate everyone's attention and the ones that responded tonight and the ones that read.